"Get out!" shouted the young CEO. "You can't afford a Mercedes, you poor man." "Before we begin, let's create a wave of positivity. Comment one word that describes how you're feeling today." The November rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ashford Premium Motors, the most exclusive car dealership in Charlotte, North Carolina. Victoria Ashford stood in her corner office on the second floor, surveying her empire with the satisfaction of someone who'd built everything herself. At 27, she was the youngest female CEO of a luxury automotive group in the Southeast, commanding a network of dealerships that moved over $200 million annually. Her Valentino suit cost more than most people's monthly salary, and she wore success like armor. Through the rain-streaked glass, she watched a battered Toyota Camry pull into the lot, sputtering and coughing like it was taking its last breath. Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrow arched with disdain. Wrong place, wrong car, wrong clientele. This was Ashford Premium Motors, where the starting price was 6 figures and the coffee in the lounge cost $12 a cup. The Camry's driver door opened, and a man emerged, hunching against the downpour. He wore faded jeans, work boots caked with dried mud, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. Victoria's lip curled. Security would handle this quickly, but then the back door opened, and a small figure hopped out, a little girl no more than 7 years old, wearing a bright yellow raincoat and clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit. The child's face lit up with pure joy as she gazed at the gleaming vehicles in the showroom. Even from her elevated position, Victoria could see the wonder in those eyes. The girl grabbed her father's hand, bouncing with excitement as they hurried toward the entrance. Something twisted uncomfortably in Victoria's chest, an emotion she quickly suppressed. Sentimentality had no place in business. She pressed the intercom button. "Marcus, we have wanderers in the showroom. Handle it discreetly." Marcus Thompson, her top sales manager, replied with his usual efficiency. "On it, Ms. Ashford." Victoria should have returned to her quarterly reports, but something made her watch. The father and daughter entered the showroom, dripping rain onto the polished marble floor. The little girl's eyes grew enormous as she took in the Mercedes Maybach S-Class, positioned under the central spotlight, its champagne-colored paint job catching the light like liquid gold. The price tag read $185,000. "Daddy, look!" The child's voice carried up to Victoria's office, high and sweet and filled with innocent amazement. "It's the prettiest car I ever saw." The father knelt beside his daughter, water still dripping from his dark hair. His face, Victoria noted with surprise, was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "It is beautiful, isn't it, sweetheart?" Ooh, his voice was soft, educated, not matching his appearance at all. Can we look inside?" The girl pressed her stuffed rabbit against her chest, suddenly shy. "Maybe just a peek," the father said, glancing around nervously. He seemed acutely aware that they didn't belong, that every salesperson in their designer suits was watching them with varying degrees of suspicion or amusement. Victoria saw Marcus approaching, his smile professional, but his eyes cold. She knew that look. He was about to execute the polite dismissal they'd perfected over years, the one that made people feel small while maintaining the dealership's pristine reputation. Before Marcus reached them, the little girl pressed her hand against the Maybach's window, leaving a small print on the glass. "Daddy, when you get your big job, will we get a car like this?" The father's expression softened, painful and loving all at once. He crouched down to his daughter's level, taking her small hands in his larger, calloused ones. "Sophie, baby, Daddy's working on something special. And when it comes through, I promise you, we'll come back here, and we'll drive away in whatever car you want. I promise you that. Even this one." Sophie's eyes, large and brown and trusting, searched her father's face. "Even this one," he confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "You deserve every beautiful thing in this world, sweetheart. And Daddy's gonna make sure you get them." Victoria felt something crack inside her chest, but she immediately reinforced it with anger. How dare he? How dare he make promises to that child that he clearly couldn't keep? It was irresponsible, cruel even, to fill a little girl's head with impossible dreams. She'd seen it 1,000 times. People living beyond their means, drowning in debt to maintain appearances, teaching their children that material things equaled love. She grabbed her phone and texted Marcus, "Get them out, now, before they waste more time." Marcus reached the pair just as the father was helping Sophie try on a pair of complimentary driving gloves from the display, letting her pretend to grip a steering wheel. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, his tone precisely calibrated between professional and dismissive. "Can I help you find something? And perhaps one of our pre-owned vehicles in the lot next door?" The father straightened, and Victoria saw him square his shoulders, trying to maintain dignity. "Actually, we're just looking at the Mercedes line, the S-Class particularly." Marcus's smile didn't waver, but his eyes flickered with barely concealed derision. "The S-Class. I see. And were you planning to purchase today, sir? Because our financing requirements for vehicles in this price range are quite substantial. We typically require a credit check, proof of income, substantial down payment." "I understand the requirements," the father said quietly. "We're not purchasing today, but soon. I just wanted my daughter to see it, to dream," Marcus finished, his tone making the words sound foolish. "That's very sweet, sir, but perhaps you might consider a more realistic goal for your family? We have a sister dealership 15 miles down Route 77 that handles quality used vehicles. Very affordable, very practical." Victoria watched the father's face flush, saw his jaw tighten, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded, placing a protective hand on Sophie's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart. We should go." "But Daddy, you said—" Sophie's voice trembled with confusion and disappointment. "I know what I said, baby, and I meant it, but not today. We'll come back." That's when Victoria made the decision that would change everything. She didn't know why. Perhaps it was the rain, or the quarterly stress, or the fact that her own father had called that morning to criticize her latest acquisition, but something in her snapped. She walked out of her office, her heels clicking sharply against the metal stairs as she descended to the showroom floor. Every head turned. Victoria Ashford rarely left her office during business hours, and when she did, it meant someone was about to be fired or a major deal was about to close. The showroom fell silent, except for the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. "Marcus, is there a problem?" Victoria's voice cut through the space like crystal. "No problem at all, Ms. Ashford. Just directing these folks to more appropriate options." Victoria approached the father and daughter, her eyes cold and assessing. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched into the man's face, the way his clothes, though clean, were worn thin at the elbows and knees. She could smell motor oil and honest sweat, so different from the expensive colognes of her usual clientele. The little girl clutched her father's hand, her earlier joy replaced by confusion and hurt. "So," Victoria said, addressing the father directly, her voice loud enough for everyone in the showroom to hear, "you promised your daughter a Mercedes. How noble, how touching." She paused, letting the sarcasm drip from every word. "Let me tell you something about promises, sir. They require the ability to keep them. This vehicle costs $185,000. That doesn't include tax, title, registration, or insurance, which for someone in your situation would be astronomical. So unless you have that kind of money tucked into those work boots, you're teaching your daughter a very dangerous lesson about living in Fantasyland." The showroom was deadly silent. Even the jazz seemed to fade. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, surprised even by Victoria's harshness. The other salespeople pretended to busy themselves with paperwork, but Victoria knew they were listening to every word. The father's face had gone pale, then red, then pale again. His hand tightened protectively on Sophie's shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried weight. "You don't know anything about me or my situation." "I know plenty," Victoria countered, crossing her arms. "I know you drove here in a car that's one breakdown away from the junkyard." I know those boots have 6 months of construction site mud on them. I know that jacket was probably bought at a discount store 5 years ago. And I know that you're filling your daughter's head with impossible dreams because you can't face the reality of your own limitations. Ms. Ashford, Marcus interjected quietly, clearly uncomfortable with how far his boss was taking this. But Victoria silenced him with a look. The little girl, Sophie, had been silent throughout the exchange, her brown eyes moving from her father to Victoria and back again. Tears had started streaming down her cheeks, but she made no sound. She simply watched, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. Then something shifted in the child's expression. The tears stopped, her small jaw set with determination that seemed far too mature for a 7-year-old. She stepped forward, placing herself slightly in front of her father, and looked directly up at Victoria. "My daddy," Sophie said, her voice small but steady, "is the smartest man in the whole world, and he's the kindest, and he's the best father anyone could ever have. He works really, really hard every day, even when his back hurts and he's tired. He reads to me every night, even when he falls asleep in the middle of the story. He makes me breakfast every morning and braids my hair, even though he's not very good at it. He helps me with my homework and takes me to the park and never, ever lies to me." Victoria opened her mouth to speak, but Sophie wasn't finished. "And you know what else?" The little girl's voice grew stronger. "My daddy told me that rich people are supposed to be nice, that when you have a lot, you're supposed to help people who have less. He said that's what good people do. But you have all these pretty cars and this big building, and you're the meanest person I ever met. So maybe my daddy is wrong. Maybe having money just makes people mean and ugly inside." The words hung in the air like smoke. Victoria felt as if she'd been slapped. Around the showroom she could sense the shock, the barely suppressed reactions of her staff. No one spoke to Victoria Ashford like that. No one. But it was what happened next that no one in that showroom would ever forget. Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope, worn at the edges. With careful, deliberate movements, she opened it and removed a $20 bill, folded and refolded so many times it was soft as cloth. "This is my birthday money from my grandma," Sophie said, holding it out toward Victoria with a trembling hand. "It's all I have, but if it'll make you be nice to my daddy, if it'll make you stop saying mean things, you can have it. Please, just be kind. That's all we want, just kindness." Victoria stared at the $20 bill, and for the first time in years, she didn't know what to say. The little girl's hand remained extended, her brown eyes searching Victoria's face for some sign of humanity, some indication that her sacrifice would matter. And in that moment, with rain beating against the windows and every eye in the dealership watching, Victoria Ashford realized she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. But she had no idea how big, no idea what chain of events this moment would set in motion. She had no idea that this wasn't their first meeting. That connection, hidden and forgotten, was about to surface. And when it did, everything she thought she knew about herself would come crashing down. Victoria stared at the $20 bill in Sophie's outstretched hand, something dark and uncomfortable coiling in her stomach. The little girl's chin trembled, but she held her ground, her arms steady, despite the tears threatening to spill over again. Around them, the showroom had become a tableau of frozen disbelief. Even Marcus, who'd witnessed Victoria's ruthless business tactics for years, looked genuinely disturbed. "Sophie, no," the father said softly, gently lowering his daughter's hand. "You keep your money. We're leaving." He looked at Victoria then, and there was something in his eyes that made her feel smaller than any business rival ever had. Not anger, but disappointment. Profound, quiet disappointment. "Come on, sweetheart." As they turned toward the door, Sophie clutching her stuffed rabbit and her father's hand, Victoria felt words rising in her throat. An apology, maybe, or an explanation, but her pride, that iron core that had carried her through hostile boardrooms and skeptical investors, kept her silent. She'd built her empire on never showing weakness, never backing down, never admitting error. The glass doors had barely closed behind them when her phone buzzed. Daniel Whitmore, her mentor and the largest investor in Ashford Premium Motors. Victoria's stomach dropped. Daniel had been like a father to her since her own had proven perpetually disappointed in her choices. If he'd somehow heard about this incident already. She stepped away from the curious eyes of her staff, answering curtly, "Victoria Ashford." "Victoria, darling, I need to see you immediately. My office, this can't wait." Daniel's usually warm voice was clipped, urgent. "It's about the Riverside project." The Riverside project. Victoria's pulse quickened. For 18 months, she'd been positioning herself to acquire the massive automotive complex on the Riverside property, a deal that would triple her footprint in Charlotte and cement her position as the dominant force in luxury vehicle sales in the Southeast. Daniel held the deciding vote on the investment board that would approve her financing. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said, already calculating drive time and gathering her essentials. "Make it 15, Daniel said, and hung up. Victoria grabbed her keys and her Prada bag, barking orders at Marcus as she headed for the private exit. "Handle the afternoon appointments. I'll be back by 4. She didn't look back at the space where the father and daughter had stood, didn't acknowledge the way her staff's eyes followed her with something new in them, something that looked like judgment. Her Mercedes-AMG GT, sleek and black and worth more than most people's houses, roared to life. As she pulled out of the lot, she passed the sputtering Camry, heading in the opposite direction, the little yellow raincoat visible through the rear window. Victoria told herself she felt nothing, told herself it was just business, just maintaining standards, just protecting her brand. She told herself a lot of lies in those 15 minutes. Daniel Whitmore's office occupied the penthouse of the Whitmore Financial Building downtown, all glass and steel and commanding views. His assistant, Margaret, who'd known Victoria since she was a scrappy 22-year-old pitching her first business plan, gave her an odd look as she ushered her in. "He's been waiting," Margaret said quietly. "Victoria, he seems troubled." Daniel stood at his windows, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the city. At 73, he still cut an impressive figure, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. He'd made his fortune in manufacturing before transitioning to investment, and he had a reputation for supporting young entrepreneurs, especially women in male-dominated industries. Victoria owed him everything. "Daniel," she began, "about Riverside." "I'm pulling my support," he said without turning around. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. "What? Daniel, we've been planning this for over a year. The projections are solid. The market analysis is flawless. We're positioned perfectly." "I'm not questioning your business acumen, Victoria." Now he turned, and the look on his face made her step back. "I'm questioning your character." "I don't understand." "Don't you?" Daniel crossed to his desk, where a tablet sat glowing. He turned it toward her. On the screen was a video, grainy but clear enough. The showroom. Victoria and the father and Sophie. The sound was off, but Victoria could see herself, see her posture, her expression, the cruelty written in every line of her body. She watched Sophie hold out the $20 bill. "How did you—" Victoria's voice trailed off. "Jonathan Mills, one of your junior salespeople, is my nephew. He sent this to me 45 minutes ago." He was appalled, Victoria. "My nephew, who's seen some of the hardest business negotiations in this city, was appalled by what he witnessed his boss do to a child." Victoria's mind raced. Jonathan Mills, the quiet young man in accessories who'd transferred from their southern branch 3 months ago. She'd barely noticed him. "Daniel, you don't understand the context. That man came in making promises he can't keep, teaching his daughter to live in fantasies." "Stop." Daniel held up his hand. "Just stop. You know what I see in this video? I see a successful woman who's forgotten where she came from. I see someone so wrapped up in protecting her precious brand that she humiliated a hard-working father and made a 7-year-old child cry. I see someone I no longer recognize." "That's not fair," Victoria protested, heat rising in her face. "You've always told me to be tough, to never show weakness, to maintain standards." "There's a difference between maintaining standards and cruelty, Victoria. A difference between strength and arrogance. I thought I'd taught you that. Clearly, I failed. The words struck deeper than Victoria wanted to admit. She forced herself to breathe, to think strategically. Okay, fine. It was handled poorly. I'll apologize. I'll send them a gift certificate, offer them a deal on a vehicle. You still don't get it. Daniel sank into his chair, suddenly looking all of his 73 years. This isn't about public relations or damage control. This is about who you've become. Your father and I had a long conversation this morning about the Riverside project. We both agree you're not ready for that level of responsibility. My father? Victoria's voice went cold. You've been talking to my father, the man who told me I'd never succeed in business because I was too emotional, the man who wanted me to marry Bradley Worthington and become a corporate wife. That father. Richard is concerned about you, Victoria. We both are. You're 27 years old, and you've achieved extraordinary things. But success without humanity is just exploitation. Wealth without compassion is just hoarding. I'm pulling my support from Riverside until you can show me you understand that. Victoria felt her carefully constructed world tilting. The Riverside project was everything. It was validation, expansion, security against the competition nipping at her heels. Without Daniel's backing, the other investors would fold. Her competitors would swoop in. Months of work, millions in potential revenue gone. What do you want from me? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. I want you to think about what happened today. Really think about it. That father, that little girl, they came into your showroom with hope, with dreams, with the simple human desire to imagine a better future. And you crushed it. Why? Because they didn't meet your aesthetic standards, because they made you uncomfortable, because somewhere in your climb to the top, you forgot what it felt like to be on the outside looking in. I never forgot, Victoria said sharply. I remember exactly what it felt like. That's why I worked so hard to get here, to never be that vulnerable again. And in the process, you became the very thing you feared, the person with power who wields it carelessly. Daniel leaned forward. Go home, Victoria. Take the rest of the day. Think about whether the empire you're building is worth the person you're becoming. Victoria left the office in a daze. Margaret didn't meet her eyes as she passed. The elevator ride down felt interminable. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, undoubtedly Marcus with updates, clients with questions, the constant demands of her business. She ignored them all. She didn't go home. Instead, she found herself driving aimlessly through Charlotte, the rain finally easing to a drizzle. Without meaning to, she ended up in her old neighborhood, the one she'd left behind at 18, with a scholarship to UNC and determination to never look back. The houses were smaller here, yards cluttered with children's toys and older model cars. A world away from her penthouse condo, downtown, with its doorman and rooftop pool. She parked in front of the house where she'd grown up, a modest ranch style with faded blue siding. A different family lived there now, their life visible through uncurtained windows, warm and chaotic. Victoria had grown up in that house with her mother, who'd worked 2 jobs after the divorce. Her father, Richard Ashford, had remarried quickly, started a new family, provided the bare minimum of child support, and even less emotional support. Victoria had learned early that money equaled security, that success was the only shield against vulnerability, that showing weakness invited exploitation. She'd made herself hard, made herself ruthless, made herself successful, and told herself it was enough. Her phone rang, not Marcus this time, but her younger half-sister, Emily. 23, engaged to a teacher, planning a modest wedding that their father complained about constantly. They spoke maybe twice a year, their lives too different to bridge easily. Emily, Victoria answered, surprised. Tori, Emily said, using the nickname only she was allowed. I heard about what happened today. Jonathan Mills is dating my roommate. She showed me the video. Of course, Charlotte was a small town dressed up as a city. I suppose you're calling to lecture me too? Actually, no. I'm calling because I know you, Tori. I know you're probably sitting somewhere right now, replaying everything, telling yourself you were just protecting your business, just maintaining standards. I know because I've watched you do it our whole lives. Every time Dad criticized you, every time someone doubted you, you got harder, tougher, more determined to prove them wrong. Victoria's throat tightened. Your point? My point is that you won, Tori. You proved everyone wrong. You built something amazing. But somewhere along the way, you started protecting your success more than enjoying it. You started seeing threats everywhere. And today, you saw a threat in a 7-year-old girl and her struggling father. He shouldn't have made promises he can't keep, Victoria said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Maybe he will keep them, Emily said softly. Maybe he's working on something that will change everything. Maybe he just wanted his daughter to have hope while they work towards something better. Isn't that what Mom did for you? Isn't that why you're where you are today? Because she never let you stop dreaming, even when things were hard. Victoria closed her eyes, leaning her head against the steering wheel. She remembered her mother taking her to look at the university campus when she was 10, years before college was a realistic possibility. Someday, baby, her mother had said, you're going to walk these halls. You're going to do amazing things. It had seemed impossible then, a fantasy, but her mother's belief had made it real. I need to go, Victoria said abruptly. Tori, I love you, Em, but I need to go. Dana, she hung up before her sister could respond, before the crack in her armor could widen further. She sat in her expensive car, in her old neighborhood, watching other people's lives through their windows, and felt more alone than she had in years. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from Marcus. Miss Ashford, you need to see this. Channel 7 News. They're running a story. It's about today. Victoria's blood ran cold. She pulled up the local news website on her phone, and there it was, trending at the top of the page. Luxury dealership CEO humiliates father and daughter. The video had gone viral. Jonathan hadn't just sent it to his uncle, he'd sent it everywhere. The comments were brutal. Victoria scrolled through them with growing horror. Disgusting behavior. This is why people hate the rich. Someone find that father and daughter. Let's start a fund for them. Boycott Ashford Motors. Her business phone started ringing, then her personal phone, then both at once, a symphony of crisis. Clients calling to cancel orders, staff members asking for statements, competitors smelling blood in the water. The carefully constructed empire she'd built was shaking on its foundation, and it had taken less than 6 hours. Victoria sat in her car, watching her phones light up with incoming calls, and realized with stunning clarity that this was only the beginning. She had humiliated that father and daughter in her moment of arrogance. Now the world was watching her fall. But what Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know yet, was that the man in the flannel shirt and work boots had a story of his own, a past that intersected with hers in ways she'd never imagined. And little Sophie, with her worn, stuffed rabbit and her $20 bill, was about to become the catalyst for a reckoning that would change all of their lives forever. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside Victoria Ashford's life was just beginning. Victoria finally returned home at 9 o'clock that night, after 6 hours of damage control that had accomplished exactly nothing. Her PR team was in panic mode. 3 major clients had withdrawn their custom orders, representing over $1 million in lost revenue. The local news had run the story on their evening broadcast, complete with commentary from a child psychologist about the impact of public humiliation on children. Social media had christened her the Ice Queen of Charlotte, and not in an aspirational way. Her penthouse condo felt cavernous and cold as she entered, her heels clicking on marble floors that cost $50,000 to install. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering Charlotte skyline, millions of dollars worth of view. She'd bought this place 3 years ago as a symbol of her arrival, her success. Tonight it felt like a museum, beautiful and empty and utterly devoid of life. She poured herself a glass of wine from a bottle that cost more than that little girl's birthday money and stood at the window, watching the city lights blur through her exhaustion. Her phone sat silent on the counter now, finally quiet after hours of constant assault. Marcus had sent a final text an hour ago. I've done all I can tonight. We'll regroup in the morning, try to get some sleep. Sleep, as if that were possible. Every time Victoria closed her eyes, she saw Sophie's face, saw that $20 bill extended with a child's desperate hope that money could buy kindness. She saw the father's quiet dignity, the way he'd protected his daughter even in humiliation, the way he'd simply said, "We're leaving," instead of fighting back. Why hadn't he fought back? Most men in his position would have argued, would have made a scene, would have threatened legal action or social media exposure. Instead, he'd taken his daughter's hand and walked away with his head high, as if Victoria's opinion didn't matter at all. That bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Her laptop sat on the kitchen counter, where she'd abandoned it that morning, a lifetime ago. On impulse, Victoria opened it and pulled up the dealership's security footage from that afternoon. She had access to all angles, all cameras. She found the timestamp and watched the scene unfold again, this time without the filter of her own participation. From this angle, she could see what she'd missed before. The way the father's hand trembled slightly when he first approached the Mercedes, as if he were afraid to touch something so expensive. The way Sophie had wiped her feet carefully on the mat before entering, her small face serious with the responsibility of being in such a fancy place. The way they'd both looked at each other with such obvious love, such unbreakable connection. And then Victoria watched herself descend those stairs like an avenging angel, watched her own face contort with disdain, watched herself deliver cruelty with surgical precision. She looked like her father. The realization hit her like cold water. Every cutting word, every dismissive gesture, every assumption of superiority, all of it was Richard Ashford incarnate. The man she'd spent her entire adult life trying to prove wrong had somehow become her blueprint. Victoria slammed the laptop closed and retreated to her bedroom, which was decorated in shades of white and silver, pristine and hotel-like. She changed into silk pajamas that cost $300 and climbed into her king-sized bed that she always slept in alone. Success had come at the cost of relationships. She dated, of course, had a few serious boyfriends in her early 20s, but they all eventually left, unable to compete with her ambition, unwilling to play second fiddle to her business. She told herself she didn't mind. That partnership was overrated, that she was enough. At 2 a.m, Victoria gave up on sleep and returned to her laptop. She opened a private browser window and typed, "How to find someone, Charlotte NC." Stupid. What was she going to do? Track down the man she'd humiliated and make it worse? But her fingers kept typing, "construction worker, flannel shirt, daughter Sophie." Nothing useful came up, just general business listings and stock photos. She tried different combinations. Single father Charlotte, Mercedes promise, 7-year-old daughter. The third search yielded results that made her breath catch. There, buried on page 3 of search results, was a local news story from 6 months ago. The headline read, "Local father battles medical system for daughter's experimental treatment." Victoria's hand shook as she clicked the link. The article was short, just a few paragraphs about a Charlotte father fighting to get insurance approval for an experimental treatment for his 7-year-old daughter who had a rare neurological condition. The treatment would cost over $300,000. The father, identified only as a local contractor, had started a crowdfunding campaign that had raised barely $15,000 before stalling. The article was dated April, 6 months ago. There was a photo, grainy and distant, but Victoria recognized the flannel shirt, recognized the shape of him, even though she couldn't see his face clearly. Sophie wasn't just a little girl. She was a little girl with a medical condition. A father making promises about a Mercedes wasn't being irresponsible. He was trying to give his sick daughter something to hold on to, something to hope for, something to dream about when her reality might be doctors and hospitals and fear. And Victoria had called her dreams fantasies, had mocked her father's promise, had dismissed their worth because of their appearance, their circumstances, their poverty. The wine she'd drunk earlier rose in her throat like bile. Victoria barely made it to the bathroom before she was sick, her body purging what her mind couldn't process. She knelt on the cold marble floor, her $300 pajamas ruined, and felt something inside her break apart. She'd made a lot of business decisions in her career. Some good, some questionable, some borderline ruthless. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was a child. A sick child. And Victoria had weaponized that child's vulnerability for the sake of her own superiority. At 4 in the morning, Victoria sat at her dining room table with her laptop, every light in the penthouse blazing as if she could drive away the darkness of her own making. She searched for more information about Sophie, about her father, about the medical condition mentioned in the article. She found references to something called juvenile neuroaxonal dystrophy, a rare and progressive condition. She found medical journal articles describing symptoms, progression, prognosis. The words degenerative and life-limiting jumped out at her like accusations. How much time did Sophie have? Was she in pain? Was the father's promise of a Mercedes his way of trying to create beautiful memories before what? Victoria couldn't finish the thought. She pulled up the crowdfunding page mentioned in the article. It was still active but abandoned, stuck at $15,247 of a $300,000 goal. The last donation had been 4 months ago. $50 from someone named Margaret Chen with the comment, "Praying for Sophie and her daddy." The page had a photo this time, clearer than the news article. Sophie smiled at the camera, wearing a hospital gown and holding her stuffed rabbit. But it was the father's face in the background that made Victoria's breath stop entirely. She knew him, not from the dealership, from before, from years before. The realization crashed over her like a wave, pulling memories from depths she'd thought were sealed forever. She zoomed in on the photo, her hands trembling so badly she could barely control the mouse. The face was older, weathered by time and hardship, but the eyes were the same. Those kind, intelligent eyes that had once looked at her with something Victoria had convinced herself she didn't need. Thomas Bennett, from her freshman year at UNC. The graduate student who'd tutored her in advanced economics when she was struggling to keep her scholarship. The man who'd spent hours in the library with her, who'd believed in her potential when she barely believed in herself. The man she'd fallen in love with during late-night study sessions and philosophical debates about capitalism and ethics. The man who'd proposed to her right before graduation, on the quad under the spring stars, with a simple ring he'd saved 6 months to buy. The man she'd turned down because accepting would have meant staying in North Carolina, supporting him through his PhD program, waiting tables or taking some dead-end job while he pursued his dreams. Victoria had been 22 and terrified and ambitious, and she'd chosen herself. She'd taken the job offer in Charlotte with the luxury automotive startup, had broken Thomas's heart with clinical efficiency, had told herself it was the smart choice, the necessary choice. She hadn't seen him in 9 years, hadn't let herself think about him, hadn't allowed herself to wonder what might have been. And now, here he was, in her dealership, in her life again. And she'd humiliated him in front of his daughter without even recognizing him. His daughter, Sophie, who would have been born about 7 years ago. Victoria did the math with growing horror. 2 years after their breakup. Was Sophie's mother someone Thomas had met on the rebound? Someone who'd helped him heal from what Victoria had done? The article had called him a single father. Where was Sophie's mother? Victoria's phone buzzed, making her jump. A text from an unknown number. "Ms. Ashford, this is Jonathan Mills from your accessories department. I know it's early, but I thought you should know the video has now been picked up by national outlets. Good Morning America just tweeted about it. I'm sorry, I never meant for it to go this far. I just sent it to my uncle because I was upset." National news. Victoria's humiliation of Thomas and Sophie was about to become a national story. Her business would be destroyed, Her reputation would be unsalvageable. Everything she'd built, everything she'd sacrificed, gone because of one moment of cruelty toward the one man who'd ever truly loved her. The irony was so sharp, it cut. Victoria had spent 9 years building an empire to prove she'd made the right choice, that success was worth more than love, that she didn't need anyone. And now, that empire was crumbling because she'd failed to recognize that the things she'd dismissed as worthless, hope and kindness and human connection, were the only things that actually mattered. As dawn broke over Charlotte, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that Victoria was too exhausted to appreciate, she made a decision. Not a business decision, not a strategic move, just a simple human decision to try to make something right. She didn't know if Thomas would accept her apology. She didn't know if it was too late to undo the damage. She didn't know if she even deserved forgiveness, but she had to try, not for her business, not for her reputation, for Sophie, for Thomas, for the person Victoria used to be before she'd let success calcify her heart. She opened her laptop again and navigated to the crowdfunding page. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed in an amount, $284,753, the exact amount needed to reach the $300,000 goal. She clicked donate before she could second-guess herself. Anonymous donor. The transaction processed, the goal meter filled to completion. Victoria stared at the screen, at the confirmation of what she'd just done, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not relief, not absolution, just the smallest possibility that redemption might be possible. But as the sun rose fully over the city, Victoria had no idea that her problems were only beginning. She didn't know that Thomas's story was far more complicated than she'd imagined. She didn't know that Sophie's illness was connected to something deeper, something that would drag Victoria's own family secrets into the light. She didn't know that her anonymous donation would set off a chain of events that would force her to confront not just who she'd become, but who she'd always been underneath all the armor. Most importantly, she didn't know that Sophie, that remarkable 7-year-old with the stuffed rabbit and the birthday money, was about to reveal a truth that would change everything Victoria thought she knew about her own life. The real story was just beginning. 3 days after making the anonymous donation, Victoria's world continued to unravel. The viral video had destroyed her reputation. National news outlets branded her the face of corporate greed. Her board of directors demanded her resignation. Major clients cancelled contracts worth millions. Everything she'd built for 9 years was collapsing, and Victoria found herself strangely relieved. The empire she'd sacrificed everything for suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. On Thursday morning, her assistant buzzed through with unusual urgency. "Ms. Ashford, there's a Thomas Bennett on line 3. He says it's personal and urgent." Victoria's heart stopped. Thomas had found her. Her hands trembled as she picked up the phone. "Thomas Bennett," she said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. "Victoria Ashford," he replied, his tone weary but controlled. "I should have recognized your name that day at the dealership, but I wasn't thinking straight. I was too focused on protecting Sophie from your cruelty to connect the dots." He paused. "We need to talk, in person. There are things you need to know, and I have questions only you can answer." They arranged to meet the next morning at a small coffee shop in Davidson, far from prying eyes and cameras. Victoria arrived early, choosing a corner booth. When Thomas walked in 15 minutes later, she felt 9 years collapse between them. He looked older, weathered by struggle, but she could still see the graduate student she'd loved, the man who'd believed in her when she barely believed in herself. Thomas slid into the booth, his eyes cautious and assessing. "The crowdfunding page for Sophie's treatment reached its goal 4 days ago," he said, without preamble. $300,000 from an anonymous donor. The surgery is scheduled for next Tuesday. Victoria's hands shook around her coffee cup. "That's wonderful news. Miracles don't just happen, Victoria. They have sources." His gaze never left her face. "It was you, wasn't it?" She couldn't lie to him, not anymore. Yes, it was me. Thomas leaned back, processing. Why? After what happened at the dealership, why would you help us? Because I was wrong. Because I was cruel. Victoria's voice cracked. Because I didn't recognize you, Thomas. 9 years, and I looked right through you like you were nobody. What does that say about who I've become? Something softened in Thomas's expression. You really didn't know it was me. Not until I went home that night and couldn't sleep. I started searching for information about Sophie's condition. I found an old news article with a photo and suddenly I saw you. Really saw you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I remembered everything. Late nights in the library, debates about ethics and capitalism, the way you believed I could change the world. And I remembered turning down your proposal because I was terrified of being vulnerable, of needing someone, of being anything less than completely self-sufficient. Thomas's face reflected understanding, mixed with old pain. I was angry for a long time after you left, but eventually I realized you were running from something deeper than ambition. You were running from fear. I was, Victoria admitted. My father destroyed my mother with his coldness and control. I watched her shrink until there was almost nothing left. When she died, I promised myself I'd never give anyone that power over me. So I built walls, made myself hard, convinced myself that success was enough. And now? Thomas asked quietly. Now I realize I chose emptiness over connection and called it strength. Victoria wiped her eyes. Seeing you with Sophie, seeing the love between you two, I realized I've been lying to myself for 9 years. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, after you left, I was a mess for 2 years. Then I met Sarah at a conference. She was kind, patient, gentle. Everything I needed while healing from you. We got married and had Sophie. For 3 years, I was genuinely happy. What happened to Sarah? Pancreatic cancer, fast and aggressive. 6 months from diagnosis to death. Sophie was 4 years old. Thomas's voice was thick with grief. Sarah made me promise to always let Sophie dream, to never let her stop believing in beautiful things. That's why I took her to your dealership. I'd just gotten news about a promotion, a real engineering position with good salary and benefits. I wanted to celebrate with her, show her that dreams could come true. Victoria felt like she was choking, and instead I crushed her dreams. I mocked your promise. I weaponized your vulnerability. You did, Thomas confirmed, but Sophie said something that day. She said, that lady must be very sad inside to be so mean. Maybe nobody taught her about kindness. My 7-year-old daughter, facing a terrifying medical condition, found compassion for the woman who'd humiliated her. The weight of Sophie's grace was almost unbearable. I want to meet her. I want to apologize properly, face to face. Thomas studied her carefully, weighing risks. Finally, he nodded. Sophie's having pre-surgery testing tomorrow at Presbyterian Hospital. Room 417, 2 o'clock. She's been following the news coverage, and she's asked about you several times. She wants to know if you're okay, if people are being mean to you the way you were mean to us. She's worried about me. Victoria couldn't process this. After everything, that's who Sophie is. She has her mother's heart. Thomas paused. The woman I fell in love with 9 years ago was ambitious, but also kind. She volunteered at the campus food bank, tutored struggling students. She believed success meant lifting others up. That woman would never have done what you did at the dealership. Maybe this isn't about who you've become. Maybe it's about remembering who you always were, underneath all the armor. His words echoed in Victoria's mind as she drove home and through the sleepless night that followed. The next afternoon she stood outside room 417 with her heart pounding and her carefully prepared apology dissolving into inadequacy. Could she find that girl again, the one who'd believed in making a difference? Or had she buried that version of herself too deep to resurrect? She knocked softly and Sophie's small voice called, "Come in." Victoria opened the door, not knowing that the next hour would change everything she thought she knew about herself, her family, and the true meaning of redemption. Victoria entered room 417, her hands trembling despite years of cultivating unshakable composure. The hospital room was small, but filled with personal touches, colourful drawings taped to walls, well-loved books stacked on the bedside table. And there, sitting up in bed wearing a pink hospital gown, was Sophie. Her stuffed rabbit sat beside her, its worn fur evidence of years of comfort. Sophie looked smaller and more fragile than Victoria remembered, but her eyes were bright and unafraid. "Hi, Sophie," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you remember me?" "You're the mean lady from the car place," Sophie said matter-of-factly, without accusation. "But Daddy says you're trying to be better now. He says sometimes people make mistakes, and the important thing is learning from them." Victoria moved closer, kneeling so she was eye-level with Sophie. "I am trying to be better, and I owe you an apology. A real one. What I said to you and your daddy was wrong and cruel. You came into my dealership with hope and joy, and I tried to take that away. I made you feel small and worthless because I was worried about protecting my image. I forgot the most important thing, treating people with kindness and respect no matter who they are." Sophie listened intently, her small face serious. "Why were you so mean? Were you having a bad day?" Such a simple question, asked with genuine curiosity. Victoria felt tears pricking her eyes. "I think I've been having a bad decade. I spent so long trying to be successful that I forgot how to be kind. I forgot that being powerful doesn't mean making other people feel small. My mommy used to say that hurt people, Sophie said quietly, holding her rabbit close. She told me when someone's mean, it's usually because they're sad or scared inside. Are you sad inside, Ms. Victoria?" The question cut through every defense Victoria had left. "Yes, sweetheart, I think I've been sad for a very long time. I just didn't know how to admit it. But meeting you, seeing how brave and forgiving you are, it's helping me remember that being vulnerable isn't weakness. It's actually the bravest thing we can do." Sophie reached out and took Victoria's hand with her small one. The gesture was so pure that Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest. All the years of armor, all the protective coldness, crumbling under the weight of a child's unconditional forgiveness. "I forgive you," Sophie said firmly. Sophie said, "Daddy says holding grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. I don't want to drink poison. I want to get better so I can go back to school and play with my friends." "You're going to get better, Sophie. You're going to have that surgery and it's going to work." "How do you know?" Sophie's voice suddenly became small and frightened, the brave facade slipping. "The doctors say it might not work. They say even if the surgery goes well, I might not wake up the same. Sometimes I'm so scared I can't breathe." Victoria looked at Thomas, who'd been standing quietly by the window. His face was stricken with the terrible helplessness every parent feels facing their child's mortality. Their eyes met, and Victoria saw past all the years and hurt to the core of who Thomas had always been. A good man trying his best in impossible circumstances. She turned back to Sophie. "I know because you're the bravest person I've ever met. I've met powerful people, famous people, people others think are important, but none of them have your courage. You're facing something terrifying, and you're still finding room in your heart to forgive, to worry about others, to hold on to hope. That's extraordinary, and extraordinary people don't give up. They fight, and you have so many people fighting with you. Your daddy, your doctors, and now me." Sophie smiled, small but genuine. "Will you come visit me after the surgery, even if I'm sleepy and boring? I'll be here every day if you want me. We'll read books together, or I can tell you stories, or we can just sit quietly. Whatever helps, Sophie. I'm not going anywhere." They talked for another hour, Sophie sharing stories about her favorite books, her best friend Emma, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Thomas gradually relaxed, contributing funny stories about Sophie's antics that made them all laugh. Victoria found herself genuinely present, not performing or calculating, just being real. This was what mattered. This was what she'd been missing. As visiting hours ended, Thomas walked Victoria to the elevator. "Thank you. For today, for the donation, for giving Sophie hope." Thomas, I need to ask something, Victoria said. That day at the dealership, did you know it was me? Did you recognize me? He shook his head. Not at first. You look different now, more polished, harder. It wasn't until that night when the video went viral and I saw your full name that I made the connection. My Victoria, all grown up and successful, exactly like she'd planned. Except you'd lost the parts of yourself I'd fallen in love with. I'm not your Victoria anymore. No, but maybe you could be someone better. Someone who learned from mistakes. Someone who uses power to lift people up. The elevator arrived. Victoria stepped inside, but before the doors closed, Thomas spoke again, his voice strained. Victoria, wait. There's something the doctors discovered during Sophie's testing today. Victoria's heart seized. Is she okay? The surgery is still on, but they found something in her genetic profile that requires family history information. They asked about Sarah's biological family, about genetic conditions in her bloodline. But Sarah was adopted. She never knew her biological parents. Victoria's mind began racing, making connections she didn't want to make. What are you saying? Sophie's condition is extremely rare, only about 100 documented cases in North America, and it's genetic. The doctors want to find Sarah's biological family to get medical history that could help Sophie's treatment. Thomas looked at her intently. Victoria, you're connected to everything in Charlotte. You have resources ordinary people don't have. Could you help me track down Sarah's birth family? The elevator doors started to close. Victoria stopped them with her hand, terrible possibilities forming in her mind. Send me everything you have. I'll start looking tonight. As the doors finally closed, Victoria pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She had a call to make, one she'd been avoiding for 6 months. She called her father. When Richard Ashford answered, Victoria said just 4 words. We need to talk, now. Victoria stormed into her father's house at 7 o'clock, bypassing his shocked housekeeper and bursting into his study where Richard Ashford sat with his Scotch and Wall Street Journal. He looked up with irritation that shifted to surprise at the fury on his daughter's face. Tell me about Elizabeth, Victoria demanded, her voice shaking. Tell me about Mom's sister. Tell me about the neurological condition that killed her. Tell me about the baby she gave up for adoption. Tell me everything you've been hiding. The color drained from Richard's face. His hand trembled. How did you? Who told? Nobody told me anything. Which is the problem? I pieced it together from hospital records and genetic testing. Sophie Bennett is dying from juvenile neuroaxonal dystrophy, the same condition that killed Elizabeth, and Sarah Bennett, Sophie's mother, was adopted. Do you see the pattern, Dad? Richard sank into his chair, suddenly looking all of his 68 years. Sit down. This will take time. I don't want to sit. I want answers. I want to know why my cousin is dying, and I never knew she existed. Then you'll get your answers, but you won't like them. Richard paused, gathering himself. Elizabeth got pregnant at 22. It was 1990. The father disappeared when he found out. Your grandmother and grandfather were old Charlotte society, very religious, very concerned with appearances. They sent Elizabeth away to a home for unwed mothers in Virginia. She gave birth to a baby girl in March 1991. The adoption was arranged before the baby was born. Elizabeth never got to hold her daughter, never got to name her, never got any information. They stole her child, Victoria whispered. They did what they thought necessary to protect the family's reputation. Elizabeth came back and tried to pretend it never happened. Your mother was 19 then, devastated. She begged her parents to let Elizabeth keep the baby, offered to help raise the child, but they refused. The rift never healed. And then Elizabeth got sick, Victoria said. 2 years later, juvenile neuroaxonal dystrophy. The doctors said it was genetic. She deteriorated rapidly. Your mother watched her sister lose everything, the ability to walk, to speak, to care for herself. Elizabeth died at 27. 27. Victoria's current age. The parallel sent chills through her. The guilt consumed your mother, Richard continued. She became obsessed with finding Elizabeth's daughter. She spent years searching, hiring investigators, following every lead. She was still searching when we met, when we married, when you were born. And did she find her? Victoria already knew the answer. Yes, about 10 years ago, right before your mother got her heart condition diagnosis. She finally tracked down Elizabeth's daughter. Sarah Morrison, adopted by a family in Raleigh. Sarah had married Thomas Bennett. They had a daughter named Sophie. The room spun. Mom found them and never told me. She wanted to. God, Victoria, she wanted to so badly. She talked about it constantly those last months. She wanted to bring Sarah's family to Charlotte, make amends for what her parents did to Elizabeth, but I stopped her. You what? Victoria's voice was deadly quiet. You were 17, preparing for college. You were so driven, so focused. Your mother was dying, though she wouldn't admit it. I thought bringing in this long-lost family with their trauma would derail you. I thought I was protecting you. You weren't protecting me. You were controlling me, controlling the narrative, just like you've controlled everything in my life, pushing me to be harder, colder, more ruthless. You shaped me into a version of yourself, and I was so desperate for your approval that I let you. Richard stood, reaching for her, but Victoria stepped back. There's more, isn't there? I can see it on your face. Her father sagged in defeat. Your mother left something for Sarah. Money, documents, medical records, photos of Elizabeth, letters explaining everything. She put it all in a trust with specific instructions that it be released on Sarah's 30th birthday. That trust is managed by Daniel Whitmore. It's worth about $2 million. $2 million. Victoria's voice was hollow. When is Sarah's 30th birthday? Next month, April 15th. But Sarah died of cancer 2 years ago. She never made it to 30. The trust is still there, legally complicated because the intended recipient is deceased and there's a minor child involved. Victoria felt like she might collapse. So, Sophie could have had that money all along. Thomas could have gotten her treatment years earlier, could have had financial security. I know what I did. I know what I cost them. I've been lying awake for 2 years trying to figure out how to make it right. You've been lying awake for 2 years, while Thomas worked 3 jobs to save his daughter's life, while Sophie faced her diagnosis with only her father's love, while I built my empire on ruthlessness you taught me, never knowing I had family who needed the compassion you'd trained out of me. She turned toward the door. Richard's voice stopped her. What are you going to do? Victoria looked back, seeing him clearly for the first time, not the titan she'd tried to impress, but a frightened, selfish man who'd chosen control over connection. I'm going to tell Thomas and Sophie everything, about Elizabeth, about Sarah, about the trust. I'm going to make sure Sophie gets every penny and all the support she needs, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life being the person Mom wanted me to be. Victoria, wait. No, I'm done waiting. I'm done hiding. I'm done being the person you made me into. Mom knew that family is about showing up, choosing love over fear, admitting when you're wrong. I'm going to honor her memory by being the daughter she deserved. 2 hours later, Victoria sat in Thomas's living room while Sophie slept upstairs and told him everything. Every secret, every lie, every hidden connection. Thomas listened in stunned silence. So Sarah had family she never knew existed, he said quietly. She died thinking she was alone except for Sophie and me. I'm so sorry, Thomas, for all of it. Thomas was quiet, then said, Sarah used to talk about feeling incomplete, like a piece of her story was missing. She'd wonder about her biological family. I wish I could tell her she came from people who loved her, who were forced to give her up. You can tell Sophie. You can tell her about her grandmother Elizabeth. About the great-aunt who never stopped looking for them. You can tell her she's not alone. Family, Thomas repeated. You're saying you're Sophie's what exactly? Second cousin, technically, but the technical relationship doesn't matter. What matters is that Sophie has family who care, who will be there for her, who will make sure she never feels alone again. Thomas studied her face. Why should I trust you? A week ago, you humiliated my daughter. Now you're telling me we're family? How do I know this isn't guilt or PR strategy? You don't. You have no reason to trust me, but I'm asking anyway. I'm asking for a chance to show Sophie what family means. I'm asking for a chance to be who my mother believed I could be." Thomas sat in silence for an eternity. Finally, "Sophie's surgery is in 4 days, 12 hours long, high risk, terrifying. If you're serious about being family, prove it. Be there on surgery day. Sit with me in that waiting room. Help me be strong for Sophie. Do that, and maybe we can start to build something real. I'll be there for as long as you both need me." The surgery day arrived with cruel sunshine. Victoria came at 5 in the morning with coffee and bagels, finding Thomas in pre-surgical waiting, holding Sophie's hand as nurses prepared her. Sophie, despite everything, smiled when she saw Victoria. "You came. I told Daddy you would. I told him you were family now, and family shows up." Victoria's throat closed. "That's right, sweetheart. Family shows up, and I'm going to be right here when you wake up." "Will you tell me about my mommy's family?" Sophie asked, drowsy from medication. "Will you tell me where I come from?" "I'll tell you everything," Victoria promised, kissing her forehead. "Every story, every photo, every piece of your history. You're going to know exactly who you are and where you came from." They wheeled Sophie away. Thomas and Victoria sat in the surgical waiting room for 12 agonizing hours, holding hands, both barely breathing. Finally, Dr. Martinez emerged with a tired but triumphant smile. "She did beautifully. Complete success. She'll need months of recovery, but her prognosis is excellent." They cried together, 9 years of complicated history dissolving in shared relief and joy. 6 months later, on a sunny Saturday in June, Victoria watched as Thomas drove Sophie up in a champagne-colored Mercedes Maybach S-Class. The same car Sophie had admired that rainy November day. Sophie emerged, healthy and radiant, her hair grown back, her movements strong and sure. She ran to Victoria and hugged her tightly. "Cousin Victoria, Daddy kept his promise. We got the pretty car." "He did," Victoria agreed, smiling at Thomas. "Your daddy always keeps his promises." Victoria had changed everything in 6 months. She'd stepped back from daily operations, promoted Marcus to CEO, redirected her energy toward non-profit work, helping families navigate medical crises. She'd reconciled with her sister Emily, started therapy, and slowly rebuilt herself into someone her mother would have been proud of. She'd sold her penthouse and bought a house 3 blocks from Thomas and Sophie, becoming a fixture in their daily lives. Some whispered about scandal, about the Ice Queen's fall and rise. Victoria didn't care. She'd learned that public opinion was nothing compared to the weight of a 7-year-old's hand in hers. "Can we go for a drive?" Sophie asked, bouncing with excitement. "Just us, the family." "The family," Victoria repeated, the words sweeter than any business victory. "Yes, sweetheart, let's go." As they drove away, Sophie chattering happily in the back seat, Thomas driving with easy confidence, Victoria looked at her reflection and barely recognized herself. The armor was gone. The ice had melted. What remained was simply human, flawed, loving, learning, growing. She'd lost an empire to gain a family. She'd shattered her pride to find her heart. And somehow, impossibly, the little girl with the $20 bill and the worn stuffed rabbit had saved them all. Not with money or status or power, but with the simple, revolutionary act of forgiveness and the belief that everyone, even mean people, deserved a second chance. In the end, that belief had changed everything, and Victoria Ashford, for the first time in her life, was finally truly free.